On behalf of the Tibet Policy Institute, kindly accept my warmest tashdele and assalamu alaikum. We are today truly honored and glad to have amongst us Mr. Mobashir Javed Akbar, or better known to us as Mr. MJ Akbar, one of India's most distinguished writers and public figures. In his long and illustrious career as a journalist of almost 4 decades, Mr. Akbar has practically worked with almost every major media group in India. He began his career in journalism way back in 1971 with The Times of India and moved quickly to become editor of Onlooker and Sunday in his early 20s. Before launching The Telegraph in 1982, which is widely recognized as India's first modern newspaper. He later launched India's first international newspaper, The Asian Age in He later launched India's first international newspaper, The Asian Age, in 1994, and was also the editorial director of India Today, and also founded and served as the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Guardian. His op-eds and blogs are widely received, such as the byline for the Sunday Guardian, The Siege Within for the Times of India, and The Third Eye for the India Today. He's also the author of several internationally acclaimed books on the history of South Asia, the volatile interplay of faith and nationalism on the Indian subcontinent, and conflicts between the Muslim and Christian worlds. His other books include Nehru, The Making of India, and The Shade of Swords, Jihad and the Conflict Between Islam and Christianity. He was also advisor in the Ministry of Human Resources in the areas of education, national literacy, mission, and protection of heritage. Your kind sir was also invited by King Abdullah to draft a 10-year charter for Muslim nations on behalf of the IOC, and was also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, Washington, as a visiting fellow in the project on US policy, the Islamic world. Sir, you have also served as a directly elected member of the Indian Parliament, and you are currently the national spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Today's topic that you will be touching on is religion is as modern as science. And sir, I'm glad to report to you that amongst our audience today, we have some of the top bureaucrats of the Central Tibetan Administration, as well as ministers and secretaries. So I request Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sangye to kindly take over the proceedings from here.
It's a great honor and privilege to have MJ Akbarji here with us. And I was just told that MJ Akbarji was here in 1984. So after 31 years, he has come back to Dharamshala. So with this visit, given the weather in Delhi and Dharamshala, I'm sure you'll have fond memories of your visit here, and then reconnect, as you have always done, with the Tibetan people and Tibet as an issue. And I had a privilege of meeting with MJ Akbarji at Halifax Security Forum, where he was one of the keynote speakers, and also in Goa, when the India Foundation organized a major conference. So it's a delight to see you here, and I will request you to speak on very interesting topic, religion is as modern as science, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Dr. Lobsang Sangye, eminent ministers, bureaucrats, friends, I've chosen this subject quite deliberately. It's, in a very small sense, a very small tribute to a very great man. The Dalai Lama today is the most important embodiment of the power of faith. I hope in the course of this lecture, I will also try and distinguish between the meaning of religion and faith. And for me, the Dalai Lama is also, in many senses, above religion. We all, we all wish him a very long life, not just for himself, but for his cause. Without him, the cause is weakened. When I assert that religion is as modern as science, there is already a sense of defensiveness in the theme, as if religion is somehow regressive and science is somehow progressive. If you look at it historically, this debate is actually quite new. And it begins with a very subtle shift in our definition of knowledge. The ancient definition of knowledge and the definition of knowledge for long periods, for most of human history, has been holistic, has been total, has been knowledge in all its categories, including the mystical, including the spiritual. It is only with the rise of the modern West that this definition took a very critical turn, and science became the most dominant aspect of this spectrum of knowledge. Now, why did this critical turn become a dominant fact of lives all across the world? Because it is a fact of history that the dominant power sets the agenda, not merely the political agenda of the world, but also the intellectual agenda of the world. And in that respect, science has begun to define the intellectual agenda of the world. We must always remember that knowledge is the basis of power, including political power. Political power is not an extension of martial power or the extension of armies. Armies and their success is an extension of knowledge. When we look at, I often give this example, I have written about this example, that if you look at the last great empires of the world, which in fact collapsed exactly 100 years ago, or between 2014 and 1914 and 1919. Then the last great powers, the Chinese collapsed a little earlier than that. And the syndrome could be extended to the Chinese power as well as into the Japanese power as well. But the reason for the collapse of the last two Muslim empires, which is the Ottoman and the Mughal, was not because they had become weak in military tactics and in military might. It is because they had become weak in knowledge. And where did this weakness spring from? In my view, this began for a very significant year in history. That year was 1455. It was about 10 years after the fall of Constantinople, and therefore at the height and the zenith of Ottoman power. And what happened in 1455? The establishment of the printing press, Gutenberg. Now what happened with Gutenberg? Gutenberg, the arrival of the printing press did something unique in the history of knowledge. It was the first time that knowledge began to get democratized. Before that, knowledge in all communities, not just in Tibet, but in Tibet is an obvious case, India, Brahmins are an obvious case, but all across the world, knowledge was really the repository or in the hands of a very small elite. That elite was essentially religious, was essentially priestly. Knowledge was the power center of monasteries or abbots, with some of it doing a small spillover into the aristocratic class, but not too much. But with the arrival of the printing press, for the first time, knowledge got the chance to become a democratic fact. And this took a long while. You can see that printing first goes into the church, because the Bible starts getting printed. From the church, the printing of the Bible then leads to an enormous cultural revolution, which is the rise of languages. Before, Latin was the dominant language of the West, and after the rise of printing, each language, German, English, French, translations of the Bible began. So the church was the leading force in this linguistic cultural revolution, and from there it went into schools, and from into schools it created a middle class, and that middle class created the Industrial Revolution. Now, what was the secret of Ottoman success over Europe? The secret of Ottoman success, as I said, was knowledge. The Ottomans, like the Chinese, were in the forefront of metallurgy. And it was the quality of their steel and of their guns which gave them the firepower. The whole of the Mongol success, it's an amazing fact which nobody quite knows. The whole of the Mongol success for 500 years, 600 years, they rose from nothing into a world power. How did Genghis Khan become a world power? By the way, Genghis Khan gets a bad press. He isn't as bad as he's made out to be. Why? It was because the Mongols discovered the technology of mixing silk and leather. And this silk and leather combination gave them armor. And this was light armor, which was very significant, because you cannot have a fast cavalry with heavy armor. And when they were fighting, the knights of the West, which you read about in all your books, each knight of the West had something like 20 kilos of metal on his body, whereas this Mongol cavalry had just a lightweight jacket. And this enabled them to wheel their cavalry around and shoot at 180 degrees, their arrows, while they were moving away out of range of the enemy target. So it's all technology. Why did they lose touch? One of the most interesting facts I find about India is that it took a Danish church priest to bring printing to India in Sirampur to print the Bible. And the printing press did not come into the Ottoman Empire till something like 1715, 300 years later. So he'd lost 300 years of advantage. Why did it take so long? There's nothing in Islam against printing. The first Bible, the first printed Quran was given to Salim the Great in 1580. You know why? Stunning fact. Because of the power of trade unions. The bureaucracy was Luddite, was frightened that its jobs would be taken away by printing, because their biggest job was as scribes. They used to record. Still, I am also very suspicious of the theory that science really began in a modern age with either Newton or with Galileo. I've often wondered, was there no medical science with the first human birth? Can you cut an umbilical cord without a knowledge of science? Was the wheel not great technology? Can you make the pyramids without an understanding of gravity? This is not to disparage Newton, but merely to put him into perspective. Can you make the great caves, cave temples of India, without a knowledge of gravity? Impossible. So science as a fact has coexisted, but science never was the dominant fact. The last 3 centuries, which have been the centuries of the West, have witnessed what I call the ascent of utilitarian knowledge at the expense of spiritual knowledge. Previously, the great societies all over the world Tibetan society, Chinese society, Indian society, Japanese society, I mean Greek society. There was a coexistence between the spiritual and the technical, between the spiritual and the scientific. That coexistence began to disappear. Now, I have no problem. I don't think that being utilitarian is necessarily a reprehensible thing or a bad thing. I mean, all of us want electricity, face it. And nobody wants to live in darkness. In fact, the social history of the world can probably be divided into a pre-electricity age and a post-electricity age. The only thing I really miss about the pre-electricity age, and those of you who get a chance to read the literature of the pre-electricity age, please remember that the metaphors and the language is completely different, because the pre-electricity age is far closer to nature. Far closer to nature. And so the metaphors and the similes and even the attitudes to life were very different. However, I am not going to claim that I would want to go back and live there. The price that was paid, however, was the domination and the complete. Now, there were many reasons for this. There were many, I will come to that, but before I go further, I would like to distinguish between religion and faith. Faith is universal. Religion is the demarcation of faith into cults. Religion is the division of faith into separate, might call them cults, and to call them different kinds of religion. But at the heart of faith, the two bookends of faith are two questions to which we still have not found an answer. And what are the two questions that are the two bookends of faith? Why were we born, and what happens to us when we die? The rational or scientific mind scoffs at the answers that faith provides. Faith, after all, talks of a divine order. Science says there is no empirical evidence of a divine order. When I think about this, I ask myself, why should the mystical not also be truthful? I also find the rational argument to be a bit strange. The most important empirical evidence of the miracle of birth is there in front of us, there with us every day of our lives. It's called the human body. This is extraordinary. And if you look at the construct of the human body, of any living organism, its balanced network of nerves, its sensitive, complicated internal machinery, or go beyond the physical to the vast outreach of the human mind. The mind is such a powerful, it's nebulous, but it is such a powerful fact of our existence. To the intensity of human emotion, to the imagination that gives birth to art and music and architecture and the arts. Can such an ordered complication in every single human being be a mere accident? The human being himself or herself, actually herself far more than himself, because a woman is a much more ordered, including emotionally, psychologically, and rationally, being than the man. That this accident theory of birth seems to me a bit of a pomposity. Yes, faith demands humility. The humility to recognize that there is something more powerful than us. And that is what the brain, the rise of the brain and the rise of reason has turned man into a little more, has given man a little more arrogance than we should be living with. Even the atheist actually believes that there is a moment of creation. There is no scientific examination of human life which does not admit that there was a moment of creation. Whether that creation was in the form of a speck of dust, or a speck of semen, or a speck of some inordinate matter. There was something. And if there was creation, is it so illogical to believe that there must be a creator? Faith, all faiths, have bridged the gap between life and death through the concept of the Atma, through the concept of the soul. This concept of Atma and the soul cuts across all religions, cuts across all forms of faith. In Hinduism or in the classic subcontinental understanding, philosophy, the Atma is the source of Pran. In the Quran, the Atma is the Ruh. In a very interesting diversionary aside, you know that the distinctive Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all Abrahamic faiths. But the distinctive difference between Islam and Christianity, the doctrinal difference, is the doctrine of Tawheed, or the unity of God, that God is indivisible. And the nearest that the Quran comes to making any man, or giving any man a touch of divinity, is to which prophet? Not to Muhammad. It is actually to Jesus. Jesus in the Quran is called Ruh Allah, the Ruh of Allah, the soul of Allah. And while the virginity of Mary is taken as a granted, as a given in the Bible, the virginity of Mary is actually explained in the Quran as to why it happened. And the answer is again very logical. The Quran says that you say that you disbelieve that Jesus was born of only a woman and not of a man. But the original creation, Adam, you may call it what you like, call it Manu, call it Brahma, Brahmand, call it what you like. That the original creation was born of neither man nor woman. So it is up to the will of God to devise how, in what form he creates. If he can create something out of nothing, he can also create something out of only a woman. The Persian word for Atma or soul is a word that we use every day. You can go out, ask anyone outside, and you know the word. It's called Jan. And the second Arabic word for it is very interesting. It's nafs. But a woman who has just given birth is called nafsa. And here, the meaning is implicit, that she has given birth and brought a little touch of the divine with her. Religion. Is it a product of fear? That is the other scientific challenge to religion. That religion is nothing but a byproduct of fear. It is like saying that science is a byproduct of greed. Yes, of course. There have been lots of scientists who have tried to be alchemists, trying to turn base metal into gold. That has been one of the continuing scientific projects. Sometimes I think that all those scientists in multinational laboratories who are producing fairness creams, right, trying to change your color by selling you overpriced creams, are exactly the same kind of frauds that used to be the alchemists. But you cannot condemn science because of a few greedy scientists. Similarly, you can't condemn religion because some of the fears of mankind transferred themselves into a need for an answer. The pharaonic Egyptians, even today in the Sundarbans, the tiger goddess is worshipped. Yes, understandably, that is a byproduct of fear. Go back to the pharaonic Egypts. They used to worship the crocodile, the dog, the bull, and the ibis. Not all of them connected with fear, but all of them were symbols of something. The pre-Islamic Arabs, Then this is there in Abdullah Yusuf Ali's majestic translation. With the pre-Islamic Arab deities were Wad, Suwa, Yaqut, Yawq, and Nasr. Man, woman, lion, horse, and falcon. Man was the worship of power. Woman was the worship of beauty. Lion was the worship of strength. Horse was the worship of speed. And the falcon was the worship of insight. They also worship Dahr, the god of time. And we can understand why nature elicited worship, because nature can be both extraordinarily beneficial and extraordinarily dangerous, can be both a boon and a curse. I just have experienced what nature can be when I was in the earthquake in Nepal, and I tell you, there are no words which can translate that precise experience of, in that case, 100 seconds, but and also an eternity. And incidentally, when there is an earthquake of such magnitude and you're so close to the epicenter, the earth actually does begin to roar. You can hear the roar of the earth. So there are forces within the earth which are, magnificent at one scale. But the power of faith lies not in its ability to counter fear, but to transcend it. That really is the basis of our faith in faith. True salvation, there is a qualitative difference between fear of somebody who can hurt you, an animal or a demon or an ogre. But we move up the philosophical scale when we change that to fear of judgment, which becomes a moral issue. But the ultimate transcendence is in Buddhism, or is in the Dalai Lama's faith, which is transcending the fear of death itself. The moment you stop fearing death, then you cannot fear anything, because that is the ultimate fear. And I find when people listen to the Dalai Lama, they do not understand how can he be sometimes quite mischievous about death. And he is that, because you can see very clearly that this man is not afraid of either. He's certainly not afraid of life, and he's totally not afraid of death. He treats it as one doorway in the long corridor of time. You have to pass that door when you pass to another existence. The soul will move to another existence, whether that existence in your case or his case can mean rebirth, in my case might mean a paradise, in somebody else's case can mean something, but it's only a door. The accusation against religion, which I do find formidable, and I do find cause for consideration, is the fact that most religions imprison. Oh, thank you. That most religions imprison knowledge within dogma. That is dangerous. That is dangerous. They are, this is actually ironic. This may be called the Galileo syndrome, when the church refused to believe what Galileo, the scientist, was telling him about the relationship between the sun and earth. Dogma is dangerous. There are Muslims who will believe that knowledge begins and ends with the Quran, even though the Prophet himself said that if you have to go to China, to the walls of China in search of knowledge, do so. Do so. But if you turn, and that really, and this is doubly ironic because the old madrasas and the monasteries were in the forefront, in the vanguard of the fight for greater knowledge. That is why all the colleges of Oxford and Cambridge are named after saints, and many after Christ himself. That is why the madrasa used to lead. That is why the monasteries used to lead in the battle for knowledge. But there came a point, and this point came about 500 years ago, when dogma began to defeat religion. And this in turn led to, you may call it the Reformation, you may call it the challenge. In fact, it was much more than a Reformation. There was a revolution against established dogmatic religions. This revolution bred the cults or the theologies, the new theologies of agnosticism and atheism. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity all suffered from closed minds. Darwin challenged the foundational precept of the Bible and the Quran. Hinduism, as was pointed out so forcefully by both Vivekananda and Gandhi, had become nothing but a litany of superstition. As Swami Vivekananda said, we have driven our faith into the kitchen. But Gandhi and Vivekananda are also supreme examples of another fact, that you don't have to abandon religion in order to save it from the religious. They remained truly religious. But in the West, there was a significant fact developed in the West. It is what I call the conversion of the brain and faith into adversaries. Instead of being in harmony, instead of intellect being a partner of faith, intellect became an adversary. And that is really the meaning of the age of reason, where reason, a product of the brain, of the mind, began to be seen as superior to faith, a product of the instinct. I quote Karen Armstrong. This is the only quote I will inflict upon you. It's in a marvelous book, Fields of Blood, Religion and the History of Violence. And it's useful for you. Each of us has not one but three brains which coexist uneasily. In the deepest recess of our grey matter, we have an old brain that we inherited from reptiles that struggled out of the primal slime 500 million years ago. This was the feed, fight, flee when necessary and reproduce brain. But after some time, mammals appeared. They evolved what neuroscientists call the limbic system, perhaps about 120 million years ago. And this motivated all sorts of new behaviors. And the most important aspect of the second stage of the brain's process was the arrival of compassion. And with the arrival of compassion, you can see that this is the beginning of the rise of faith, because faith does not exist without compassion. This was called the care brain. Then about 20,000 years. Therefore, in terms of the time scale, 20,000 years is about less than 1 second or microsecond in the history of time. About 20 years ago, during the Paleolithic age, human beings evolved a new brain, the neocortex, home of the reasoning powers and self-awareness that enable us to stand back from the instinctive primitive passions. Humans thus became, roughly as they are today, subject to the conflicting impulses of their three brains. But actually the rise of reason also made human beings into something which they were not before, which is proficient killers, but that is for another lecture. But then in the West, as in challenge to the church, there arose basically two doctrines. One was the secular doctrine of Voltaire, and that secularism, French secularism, by the way, is significantly different from Indian secularism. French secularism was the separation of church and state. For us in India, or I presume anywhere in the East, secularism is not the separation of church and state. Separation is the equality of every faith before the law, and not only before the law, but equality of every faith in its practice in society. What makes me especially proud as an Indian is that I live in the only country in the world. There may be exceptions, but broadly, the only country in the world. Oh, there are no exceptions today. Because your country is not independent. We live in the only country where you can hear the azan every morning loudly, followed by the temple bells, followed by the Guru Granth Sahib of the Sikhs, followed by the pealing of bells in the church. I call it audible secularism. Nobody else has audible secularism. As against this, there was first the rise of agnosticism, which is really the rise of questioning of God. And along this, with this became eventually, this is succeeded with the rise of Marxism, which is the rise of atheism as a fundamental precept. Because Marxism has, as it's one of his fundamental pillars, the belief that religion is the opium of the masses. And therefore religion essentially is an antithetical to the popular interest. What these movements did, whether it was Voltaire's or Rousseau's doctrine or Marxism, is they made a fundamental mistake. They threw the baby out with the bathwater. Because for all the thinking, they were unable to answer a fundamental question of life and death, the two bookends of faith. Today, if you look at the world and you look at the conflicts that are raging across the world, and this leads actually to the misunderstanding that religion is a cause for wars. Religion is not a cause for wars. Wars are fought for greed. Nobody comes to conquer a poor country. Nobody. Nobody. Nobody was interested in the deserts of Arabia until they found oil. Nobody was in, India has been constantly conquered. Not because anyone wanted or loved Indians, but because the Gangetic Plain is the most fertile agricultural tract, perhaps in the world. They came to Tibet because Tibet is the greatest resource of water in the world. There is no greater resource of water. You take away Tibet, the world, half the world will starve, will die. Tibet is critical element of the geology as well as geopolitics, actually. Look at the number of rivers that flow. Which major nation is not watered by the waters of Tibet? Certainly we are. Ganga, Brahmaputra, Indus, the Chinese rivers all emerge from Tibet. So the control of Tibet is control of resources. But the conflict zones of the world lie in the relationship between how do we treat religions. And I tell you the three conflicts are taking. Some of them, they are becoming armed conflicts. Some of them are becoming conflicts waiting to explode. And third is where you have comparative peace. The regions of the world where there is comparative, I use the word comparative, there is nothing called total peace. Total peace may or may not come to us after we are dead, but certainly we don't see it in this life. The comparative peace is in the nations and those regions of the world which have accepted faith equality as the basis of human coexistence, which means it doesn't matter which faith you belong to, there is minority or majority, numbers are not the basis of law. That everyone, even if there was just one Muslim in the whole of India, the law would be equal for one Muslim. And there was one Buddhist, the law would be equal for one Buddhist. If there was one Jain, the law would be equal for one Jain. That is faith equality. Most of the West has faith equality after long trials and tribulations. The second is a conflict that is already raging in large parts of the world, created by forces which believe in faith supremacy. Most of the conflict that's taking place in the Muslim world, Arab Muslim world, is being led by forces who believe that their faith is supreme rather than, I mean, for me individually, my faith may be supreme, but as a social creature, I have to permit those who disagree with me. There is an ayat of the Quran which establishes this. Lakum dinakum wa iliya din, your faith for you and my faith for me. And what better definition there can be of secularism except this? Yes, your faith for you and my faith for me. Let God be the judge. Who are you and I to keep judging each other? I have often said, you must never blame Islam for the sins of Muslims. But here there are forces which believe in faith supremacy. Remember one thing, when you hear that the Christians are being driven out of Iraq, please remember that for 1400 years, Islam has been there and Christians have not been driven out. They are being driven out today because of maniacal forces that have taken over decrypt and collapsing regimes, societies. That's the region. And the third is places which deny faith at all. They cannot survive in a modern world. Russia had to pay a heavy price, the Soviet Union, because it denied faith. Today you can say whatever else you might want about Putin, but he knows the power of the church. He allows, even though it may be through his own man, in the Muslim regions, full freedom of prayer. Full freedom of prayer. You cannot be frightened of faith. The moment you're frightened of faith, all you mean is that you're frightened of reality. And I see this conflict in countries, mainly communist, where they still have not allowed faith to flower. And that's the real trouble with them. The real trouble is not the dynamics of external aggression, the dynamics of internal turmoil. Can they survive the dynamics of internal turmoil? I don't know. But I would suspect very strongly. Because for me, the definition of modernity and a modern nation state is 4 pillars, without which you cannot call yourself modern. Number 1, you must have democracy. If you do not have democracy, you may be successful, but you will never be modern. And you will never be able to challenge the urge for freedom. Man does not live by bread alone. In fact, very often the need for freedom comes after his need for bread has been satisfied. The second, you have to have faith equality and you have to have freedom of faith. Without freedom of faith, you cannot be a modern nation. Freedom of faith includes the right to be atheist, by the way. It includes the right to be faithless. But you must have the right. You must have the right to worship the Buddha, you must have the right to worship Allah, you must have the right to worship Shiv and Krishna, whoever you want. Third, you cannot be a modern nation without gender equality. That age is over. The age of gender separation is over. No society, any society, anywhere in the world. Some societies accept the first two and get a relapse on the third, on the role of women and the place of women in their present and in their future. Actually, in much of the Muslim world, there has been gender regression. In the 50s and 60s, there was far greater gender freedom than there is today. And that is, again, a visible instance of how, when the powers of faith supremacy begin to take over, they color and change the dynamics of society. Fourth, of course, is economic equity. There is nothing called economic equality. It has never happened and it never will happen. But there is something called economic equity. The poor must feel that they have a right and they are participatory right in the growth of prosperity. This whole pernicious trickle-down theory, imposed upon us by economists from the World Bank is simply unacceptable. Trickle-down theory means that those who have swimming pools will get the waterfall and those who are dying of thirst will get a trickle. It won't work. That is a great weakness. That is the great challenge. I tell you, in my country, India, we have been triumphant on first three. Democracy. On faith equality, we can be proud of what we have achieved, despite the contradictions that emblazon through our history. We can be proud of the strides made in gender equality, but we still have a long way to go to eliminate the curse of poverty. And I ask over and over again, I said history is asked a question of our generation, that it took 65 years to reduce extreme poverty, poverty below the line poverty as we call it, from 60% or 65% to 30%. Is it going to take another 60 years to reduce 30% to zero? Can Indian democracy bear the burden of such a long wait? No, it cannot. It cannot. We have to eliminate poverty in the next decade. And if we do not do that, there is trouble ahead. And therefore, and I don't want to sound partisan, I did not come here to sound partisan, but I will leave you on this note that the proudest moment of at least my interaction with political life was when our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his very first speech in Parliament, and I was watching it from outside, I'm not a member of Parliament, and on television, and I saw a slight shiver of horror on everyone's face when he said this first. And he said, the age of poverty alleviation is over. And everybody was sort of wondering, what kind of thing has the Prime Minister said? And then he said, the age of poverty elimination has begun. We cannot now get away with mild form. This is a cancer. You have to kill it. You can't put Band-Aid around it. You can't put bandages around it. But that is the challenge before us, before you. There are other challenges. May we, on this occasion, both see that these challenges have a fruitful ending, and most important of all, that the Dalai Lama has a long life ahead. Thank you.
MJ just referred to, he was in Kathmandu on the day of the earthquake. So when I read his column, I was wondering, what he must have been through. Actually, the way, if you read his column, he writes so lucidly. Almost each word speak to you. When you read his column, when I read that, I could almost sense what was going on in the hotel where he was in the business center, writing his column, and then suddenly there was a major earthquake, and you saved Tibetan Muslim woman.
Yes,
life. Yes,
nobody saves you. It's God who saves you. If that we were in the far end, if the roof had fallen and the hotel was swinging by a foot. But I went to the business center, and obviously in a touristy hotel, nobody is there in a business center. So there was this young lady who was sitting at the desk. She was the manager looking after the. So I asked her, and she opened and I saw her name. She had very Tibetan features, but her name was a Muslim name. So I asked her and said that, are you a Muslim? She said, yes, of course. And said, I'm from Tibet. And I said, I had no idea that there were Muslims living in Tibet. And she said, no, we have a very flourishing community of Tibetans. But in fact, I was aware of the quake when she screamed. I was concentrating, and she was maybe 2 feet away, 3 feet away, and she suddenly screamed and looked around, and then the roar of the earth actually began And it's frightening. It's frightening. You can't. There's no other word for it. And I just at that moment you don't think with your brain. You think with your instincts. And I just said, "Get out. Just get out from here." But she was in panic, complete panic. And there was somebody. I didn't see a third person, but there was a third person, attendant, Bera kind of thing. Bera maybe there. And she leapt up and she clung to him. And I said, "Don't stay here. Just move out." Then I rushed to the door. Fortunately, the door opened. It wasn't locked. So, and then a little later she followed, and then, but by the time we left the hotel, there was no one there. We would have been in the. But if you think of, you think that there is nothing called destiny. And there is. To begin with, this whole visit to Kathmandu was a pure accident. It was sitting at a table. A friend of mine had come. We were meeting after 5-6 months. He had gone to Goa or something while his house was being repaired. He has a house. And he's very dear, an old friend of mine. And we said that, "Listen, why don't we just take a 2-day break? Where shall we go? Let's go to Kathmandu." And why? The air tickets are cheap. It doesn't cost too much to go there. And the hotel prices are not very expensive. So $5,000 you can get a very good hotel room in Yak and Yeti. So let's go. So till the last minute, shall we? It is no. And we went. Now here comes the interesting part. You know that Bhaktapur was completely demolished. According to our original schedule, we were supposed to go to Bhaktapur on Saturday, the day of the quake. And on the first evening, Thursday, we reached. I met a local friend who turned around and said, "Okay, what's your program?" This, and I said Saturday. And he said, "Don't be foolish. Saturday the weather is going to be bad. The rain is expected. Tomorrow is sunshine. Also, it's a holiday. So go tomorrow." So at the last minute, we switched and changed our program from Saturday. If we had been in Bhaktapur at that time, then I'm afraid I would have been part of some sacrifice to the gods. 9,000 steps. So it's strange, it's like the story of the air ticket you change at the last minute in the plane. So I don't know if there's divine power or not in these matters, but it certainly helps you to believe in astrology.
And in that same column, actually, MJG describes about Modi in action, Prime Minister Modi ji. Same day, in fact, I think the Prime Minister of Nepal also, in a way, agreed that he came to know about the earthquake through the tweet he received through Modi.
Yeah.
Even our Home Minister said the same thing.
Yeah.
So he conveyed the meeting at 1 p.m. and within 24 hours, there was a rescue team.
Not 24 hours, within 8 hours.
Within 8 hours, and then a group of you all.
I came back on the Indian Air Force flight, which is really a troop carrier flight.
Yes.
You sit in long rows on either side. If any of you have seen the movie D-Day, Second World War movie, it's like that. You sit. But as somebody remarked after we landed, he said, "Bhagwan subah ko bachaya, Narendra Modi raat ko bachaya."
And ab tak mein itna jitna bhi tax diye the aaj
Yeah. There is one doctor who was, people were nobody really opened up or started talking until we landed in Delhi. Then in the bus, because we had been taken technical area, and then it was half an hour from there to the immigration, more than that. In the bus, people began. And one doctor
from Punjab.
Yeah, from Punjab. He turned up and very thoughtfully he said, "I have been a very law-abiding taxpayer all my life. Today, all my taxes have been repaid."
Where a tax vasool hua with
Sir,
interest.
with interest.
I think if you have any questions, as you know, MJ Akbarji is a preeminent journalist, and he is much sought after speaker actually around the world. And when you go to major conferences, then you get short darshans. So I think it's a real privileged honor that MJG has come back after 31 years to be with us and talking about a very relevant topic. And then obviously, as you mentioned, the difference between, if I may, religion, religiosity and religionism. When religion in itself is not bad, in fact it's good. It's inclusive, it's all for compassion, faith. When in terms of religiosity, when it goes to community, then you, me, Christian, humanity, you are Christian, I am Hindu, becomes a bit complex. Then it turns to religionism when it becomes dogmatic or ideological. Then you try to impose that religion on other, then it becomes problematic. But then in the last 2,000 plus years, we have always seen this, time and again. And why can't we stick to religion in itself? Why we have to, I think we have to go to religiosity somehow. You have no choice, but then why we always have to go to this religionism and knowingly?
It's not that we go, religion has succeeded for far longer than it has failed.
Yes.
But since history makes it a point to record failures, because calm and peace are not a narrative. War is a narrative. If there was let's take the most famous cases. If there was a 30-year war between Protestant and that century had 70 years more.
Yes.
For 70 years there was no war. The previous 100 years there was no war. So the long periods of war, the long periods of peace are not. The Mughal Empire cannot be divided into 3 wars, which is generally how we have recorded history. There were hundreds of years of peace. The narrative of most societies, after all, peace is an absolute prerequisite of prosperity. Without peace, there cannot be prosperity. But after peace, you see the power of religion in art, in the various creative instincts of man. Creativity, whether it's in the West, whether it is in the architecture, whether it is in temples, the highest forms of creativity have been inspired by religion. Art, music, bhakti, the music. And what I find tremendously moving to the point of tears, is that the greatest of inspiration, religious inspiration, is anonymous. Is there one person who has left his signature on a temple? This great work has been done over hundreds of years by brilliant craftsmen who are equally talented. Not one had the egotism to leave his name. Today, nothing is done. Even if I write muck, I attach my name to it. And most of us do write muck. This is an age of complete pride. And religion has been always an antidote to pride, to human pride, because it teaches you about a higher power. The most famous lines about the mosque are एक ही सफ में खड़े महमूद और अयाज ना कोई बंदा रहा ना कोई बंदा नवाज. In that one line stood both the ruler Mahmud and Ayaz the slave, and in front of God there is no ruler, no slave. He may be outside the mosque. Inside the mosque, na koi banda raha, na koi banda. You are not the owner of a man, and everyone is theirs. So the power. Now, when religion has gone wrong, for example, I would even say the mischief done to Hinduism. by the creation of caste systems. The rise of Buddhism is because of what they did to the philosophy of Hinduism. And the danger very often to religion is from the religious. It's happening today in the world of Islam. But, aberrations cannot take away from the basic fact. We are going through an age of great action and reaction. Great action and reaction. Very interestingly, you see the power of culture. The Muslim world is divided into 3 broad zones. One would be called the Arab-centric zone, or 4, sorry. There is an Arab-centric zone, there is a Turkic-centric zone, Turkey right across Central Asia. There is South Asia, if you include from Afghanistan to Burma, and there is Southeast Asia. In fact, during the days of the Khilafat, during Queen Victoria's time, the British used to laugh at the Sultan of the Ottomans and say, "Why do you call yourself the Khalifa?" I said, "The real Khalifa of Muslims is Queen Victoria." Because more Muslims were under her domain than they were in the Ottoman king. It's true. The whole of South Asia has more Muslims today than in anywhere else. If you take South Asia as a whole, as it was till 1947. So the real strength of Muslim communities actually was here. But where the cultural influences and the historic influences have been ameliorated, there you find peace and prosperity. Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Bangladesh. Bangladesh was once part of Pakistan. Look at the difference in the evolution of Bangladesh and the evolution of Pakistan. You should think about it. The same history, similar history, not same. Right? Why has one? Because Bangladesh rejected religion as the basis of nationalism. A nation can have a religion, but a religion cannot have a nation. You are all Buddhists, right? But Buddhism is not restricted to Tibet. It cannot be. The whole world is potentially Buddhist. And certainly large parts of it were at one time. Does the Tibetan Muslim is not a Tibetan? Of course she is a Tibetan. So no religion can own a nation. The moment religion owns a nation, then you get Pakistan. But Bangladesh redefined itself as cultural nationalism, linguistic cultural nationalism. The moment it did that, there was a prospect of peace and prosperity. Today, on 6th or 7th of June, India and Bangladesh will sign a historic pact. We will actually be gifting back, not gifting back, it's a strong word, but we will be willingly, unilaterally handing over disputed territory. Right? It's quite unprecedented that we do so. Pakistan handed over some territory to China, but it handed over our territory, not theirs. Why? And I keep saying and arguing, our problem with Pakistan is not that it is a Muslim country. Our problem with Pakistan is that it's a terrorist country. Bangladesh has more Muslims. It was always 52% of Pakistan. Has more Muslims or equal number of Muslims. And here we have the best of relations. Why? Because we are both striving to be modern nation states. Well, Pakistan is regressing into a state which actually cannot even be called medieval. It simply has no place in history. This whole anachronism called an Islamic state, there has never been an instance of Islam being the basis of any state. On the deathbed of the Prophet, the Shia-Sunni fight emerged. So if Islam could not heal or prevent a rift, a political rift, just after the death of the Prophet, Clearly, the religion is not powerful enough to prevent drifts of nationalism or sectarianism today. Because Islam, like any other faith, is above sects. It is above nations. Islam is a brotherhood, it is not a nationhood. And so everyone should be a brotherhood. So this, in fact, Pakistan, when they say that the state of Iraq is the first Islamic state, it's nonsense. The first Islamic state is Pakistan. The second Islamic state is Taliban Afghanistan. The third Islamic state is Boko Haram. This is the fourth Islamic state. And there is an informal alliance working among all four as they seek to conquer. I don't know how much damage they will do to the world, but they will certainly damage Muslims greatly.
Any question from the audience? While audience ponder, you mentioned aberration, but then somehow this radical interpretation of some text, whether it's in Islam or in Buddhism, for example, where you see the tension in Burma with Rohingyas, or the Catholic and Protestant going after each other for so many decades in Northern Ireland, somehow this aberration or this interpretation, conservative interpretation of text always happens, and this fringe group suddenly becomes a major group over and over again. Is it because if you study the text of, I haven't, but at least read the history, mainly because what Buddha actually said was put down after 500 years. Similarly, after 500 years of Jesus, the Bible came. And as far as Muslim is concerned, it's not Allah, but Muhammad came. And also with Hindu god and goddesses, is never their words, but rather interpretation or the transcription of the words after prolonged gap. Is it that gap which led to this?
No. Buddhism came at a time when literacy was very rare. So it took a time. And also you'll find that the gap between the written text, quite often, and the prophecy, if a state emerges out of a belief system, then the state has the resources to create a written text, which a non-state may not have. So Christianity became organized, took about 70, 80 years for Christianity to be organized. And therefore the Gospels, but the Gospels were written just after, because they were written in the lifetime of Matthew. They were written in the lifetime of John and Luke and Mark. Three of them were disciples of Jesus. Similarly, the Quran was compiled within 50, 60 years of the death of the Prophet. And it was both memory as well as written inscriptions that way, because Islam became a state immediately, the state of Medina. Now, I think the problem lies elsewhere. The problem lies in the fact, and this is a fact which everybody quietly refrains from discussing. Every religion has a war doctrine. Every religion has a war doctrine. Because war is sometimes a necessary function to eliminate chaos. But war as declared by the state or as used by the state, not war as used by fringe groups, which is chaos. Who on earth can say that Hinduism has no war doctrine? After all, the Mahabharata and Ramayana are war epics. They are war epics, if they are anything. They are both metaphorical, of dharma versus adharma. They are evil, good and evil. But there are also living wars. There was bloodshed and there were battles and so on and so forth. And there was the war doctrine of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. So, jihad is a war doctrine which is included in the Quran. Very interestingly, there was no mention, not a single sanction for warfare during the time that the Muslims were being persecuted, during the Mecca period, from 610 to 622, when they were driven out, being killed, there was no sanction for war, and therefore there was no war. The war sanction only came when they went to Medina and Muhammad established a state. And then as the defender of the state, and then the jihad doctrines. Now, if you go by the original jihad doctrines, it's an extremely disciplined as well as liberal interpretation of war. You are not allowed to kill women and children. You're not allowed. Saladin used to practice this faithfully. In fact, Saladin called himself a jihadi because despite the Christians having massacred Muslims in Jerusalem when they took over, when he reconquered, every single Christian's life was saved, handed over as prisoner of war for ransom. No one was killed. The only one person he killed was a person who had threatened to destroy Mecca. No one else. So, you are not allowed to destroy date palms because they are a source of nourishment. So therefore, you have a war theory where you burn the fields which you cross so that the enemy does not get. Not allowed to do that. So it's a very strict, disciplined engagement set of rules, like a Geneva Convention. But if I would say that all Muslims live by the doctrine, nonsense. Once again, I will repeat, don't blame Islam for the sins of Muslims. Today, the doctrines that are being espoused, I was actually reading very thing yesterday, I'll send it to you on email. The documents that have been obtained from Osama bin Laden's hideout by the Americans, they have released large portions of it. The application to come for a jihadi, you should read it. It's extremely bureaucratic. Name of father, grandfather. Of course, they never ask for name of mother because they don't believe in gender equality. But are you ready to be a suicide martyr? If not, let us know. And so on and so forth. In case you get killed, who is the next of kin? It is an insurance policy. So, but they actually see themselves as states because they have to go through the doctrinal justification that you cannot declare a war, a jihad, until you are a state. So but leave it to humans to destroy any. And yet, what is amazing is the power of good still is with us. After all the havocs that have gone through the history of Buddhists, there is still a Dalai Lama. After all the havoc that has gone through the history of Muslims, particularly in the last 150 years, there are still people who say this is nonsense. Yes, sometimes we feel defeated. These days we feel more easily defeated because we are not only defeated by fact, we are also defeated by television. The coverage of news actually leaves kind of a psychological impact and numbs us because the constant search for hysteria really is an antidote to common sense. But, human beings have lived through worse. I presume we shall live through this.
So, with your permission, if I may digress on the topic a bit, I remember reading in one of your articles about handshakes being possible, not being possible on wobbly legs, and of course, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, not only strong legs and strong shoulders, India has, as you just now mentioned, is resting its claim on certain disputed territories with Bangladesh and set this unprecedented act in motion. Now, do you in the future see, now because it's not unprecedented. Do you see any more such concessions taking place along with other of its neighbors?
I know the question that you are asking, but are unwilling to. I will answer in exactly the same language. India is a status quoist power, and you must recognize that. This is not a fact of our mindset in the 60s or 50s. We may have been different, I don't know. I mean, the record says we were a bit different. Today, if I look at my country, I think there will be broad consensus on status quoism. If, for example, I mean, this is only a theoretical dice in the air. If by some reason Pakistan agrees on the ceasefire line as the solution, most Indians would agree, not all. Arey chalo, khatam karo. That status quoism means two things. One, if we do not want an inch of what you control, we will also not give an inch of what we control. That is very clear. The broadest shoulders, the steeliest will is not stronger than India's public opinion. India's public opinion will not permit anyone, and nobody wants to in India. Anybody wanting to come to terms on the basis of the status quo and then give it a pretty phrase, welcome. And let's get on with life, and let's get on to see how we can improve the quality of lives of people. And quality of lives include rights. It's not just an economic reality. There are certain rights involved. So let us see. You know, the hand, to extend the analogy, the hand of friendship has many fingers. All fingers are not equal. There are some short fingers. There are some tall fingers. So when we grasp a hand of friendship, sometimes we do it with a short finger, sometimes we do it with a long.
In fact, I was expecting a talk on geopolitics or security. So anyway, so since you are being a spokesperson of the BJP, so I noticed that during the last 1 year, since Modi took over the Prime Ministership of India, I know there's some changes in policy towards Tibetan in India. So I just wanted to know, was there any changes in policy towards Tibetan in India, or is it the same policy that's being since the Nehru period?
Ask who was one of the leaders invited to the swearing-in ceremony. As simple as that. That was very strong messaging.
And also, actually, we have Tibetan Rehabilitation Policy Act. It started during UPA time. Now, in NDA, we have this policy, which in a way defines the status of Tibetans, and the central government of India has come out in writing to support the Tibetans in India, and indirectly not recognizing but acknowledging the CTA's work, Central Tibetan Administration work. So we very much appreciate that policy as well.
Yes, the brief talk that you gave, in fact, articulated the realization that religion and science are as modern as one another. So it's very true, because we also, in the Buddhist thing, we believe that there is always a cause. There is a cause and there's a corresponding effect. So it's as good as, because both these religion and science inspire people. If you really do a serious search, they inspire a kind of creation. They inspire knowledge, and it goes on endlessly. So thank you very much for that. Now I had two questions. Number one is like, His Holiness often mentions that jihad should be read not as a, resorting to violence, but trying to tame the inner kind of the tendency to resort to violence. So how it is? I mean, what is your take on that? And number two is these self-immolations that's happening in Tibet. I am a regular kind of subscriber to Indian Express, and today we have 140 young men and women burned themselves to death. Why it doesn't find a place in the Indian media, just as other issues as happening? Thank you.
Right. To get your second question first, I don't think it is Indian media, but Indian media access is blocked. So media has to depend on secondary sources. So censorship of such facts affects coverage.
But it's happening just across the
Yeah, but
next door.
access.
And also, we believe that there's a lot of there's no restriction on media.
No,
in
there
this
is.
country.
There is.
So,
No, there is restriction on access. And unless you get, media tends to be helpless when the sources are secondary. It will report it, but it cannot report it with the vigor and the depth that a camera or a television crew, would give that. It's, this is a basic reality. Frankly. On your first question, the doctrine of jihad is misunderstood because only one aspect. Jihad has two manifestations. One is jihad-e-asghari. Asghar means little, small. Jihad-e-asghari is the smaller jihad, is the jihad of war, which we hear about. Nobody, even the way they say we are jihadi organization, they're talking of jihad. There is a jihad-e-akbari. Akbari means great. And jihad-e-akbari is the jihad which is within yourself, the war to cleanse yourself. And that is why it is called the higher jihad. That this is a matter of the state. States have to fight wars sometimes, right? And these wars often have to be fought on a certain disciplined manner, and so on and so forth, right? But the greater jihad is the jihad to become a better human being. And that sense, as I said, the humanistic base of all faiths is common, just as the soul is common to all faiths. Belief in a divine power is common to all faiths. Nobody talks of the higher jihad because it's much more difficult.
I think it's about to be 6 p.m. when we close our office hours. And thanks to the Himachal government, now we are going to have a cement road from Lower Dharamshala all the way to Meglutganj. But unfortunately, for a couple of weeks' time, the shorter road is shut because cement is. They said, I'm sure you have taken the longer route.
Yeah.
So some of the staff members living in Meglutganj is a longer route. So I can see some of them are thinking whether their daughters and sons are waiting, or husband, wife are waiting and complaining. So I think, as expected, MJ Akbar ji, as always, enlightened us with his wisdom, his profound knowledge on any issue. I've seen him talking on security, a wide range of issues, and he comes with passion and with such substance that it's very not only informative, but we learn a great deal. And topic of religion, I think it's very relevant for Tibetans because we also tend to be quite religious that way.
Yeah.
I think I completely agree with you. In one sense, religion has lived for so many centuries that it will live for many more centuries to come. in fact, strength of Tibetan identity and civilization in the struggle is also religion. For example, before Cultural Revolution, the Communist Party or the Chinese government destroyed 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries, disrobed 99% of monks and nuns. But in early 80s, when Tibetans, smelled little freedom, first thing they did was revive religion, rebuild their monasteries. And thanks to Indian government, we also take pride in India. We have rebuilt all the major monasteries and nunneries in India, which were destroyed in Tibet. And His Holiness takes pride in saying that even though we talk about Buddhism and monasteries and nunneries, actually what we have rebuilt and revived is the Indian Nalanda tradition of Nalanda University. So in some ways, India is the right place where we have come as refugees, but rebuild the Nalanda tradition or Nalanda University in some ways it's an exchange. We are bringing back that we took from India and rebuilt and revived here and then spread across the world thanks to His Holiness' great leadership. And hence religion has become a part and parcel of the Tibetan people. In one sense, our struggle is both dignity-oriented and identity-oriented. Dignity, that's why we ask for our human rights, our freedom and democracy, and identity through which we ask for our civilization, revival of civilization, our religion, our culture, our language. And thanks to Indian government, at least the identity part is very much revived and thriving and spreading across the world. And this dignity part is what we are pursuing. And with the help of the Indian government and the support which India has done most for Tibetan people, no other country or government has done to Tibetans than what India has done, actually. No other government. And because we have friends like you, who comes back after 31 years, but nonetheless, it remains engaged on the Tibet issue and remain true friends of the Tibetan people. So on behalf of the Central Tibetan Administration, all the Tibetans, I would like to thank you for taking the trouble to come here. Through the grapevine, I hear that you might be more busy in a few weeks' time if there's some reshuffling. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but given the prospective more busy schedule, you took the time to come here. So for that, we are very, very grateful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In public life, the day you believe a rumor, your story is over. But really, it has been a great honor, great pleasure. I may not have come to McLeodganj, I may not have come to Dharamshala, but I've been honored to be invited by His Holiness. I chaired a session at the last interfaith dialogue, and he's always a man who moves you to tears. Thank you.
Thank you.